It's wonderful to be with you all once again. Open with me, please, to the book of Judges, chapters 1 and 2. Judges, chapters 1 and 2. In Hebrew, we call Judges Shoftim. Shoftim. With the name Jehoshaphat, Jehovah shall judge. Chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. Then Judah said to Simeon his brother, Come up with me into the territory allotted me, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I in turn will go with you into the territory allotted to you. So Simeon went with him. And Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands. And they defeated 10,000 men at Bezek. And they found Adonai-Bezek in Bezek and fought against him. And they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to gather up scraps under my table, as I have done. So God has repaid me. So they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Then the sons of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterwards the sons of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country and in the Negev and in the lowland. So Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba, and they struck Shishai and Achiman and Talmai. Then from there he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sefer, which means the village of the book. And Caleb said, The one who attacks Kiriath Sefer and captures it, I will give him my daughter Achsah for a wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and so he gave him his daughter Achsah for a wife. Then it came about when she came to him that she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. Then she alighted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, What do you want? And she said to him, Give me a blessing, since you have given me the land of the Negev. Give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. And the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of Palms, that's Jericho, with the sons of Judah, to the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad. And they went and lived with the people. Then Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they struck the Canaanites, living in Zaphat, and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. Now the Lord was with Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had iron chariots. Then they gave Hebron to Caleb, and as Moses had promised, and he drove from there the 3 sons of Anak. But the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Likewise, the house of Joseph went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph spied out Bethel. Now, the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, Please show us the entrance of the city, and we will treat you kindly. And what seems to be a replay of the story of Rahab, we read in verse 25, So he showed them the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and all his family go free. And the man went into the land of the Hittites and built the city and named it Luz, which is its name to this day. But Manasseh did not take possession of Bethshan and its villages, or Taanach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor, that's on the Mediterranean coast, and its villages, or the inhabitants of Iblaim and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. So the Canaanites persisted in living in that land. And it came about when Israel became strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who were living in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or Achlab, or of Achziv, or of Helba, or of Afik, or of Rehov. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anat, but lived among the Canaanites. the inhabitants of the land. And the inhabitants of Bet Shemesh and Bet Anath became forced labor for them. Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. Yet the Amorites persisted in living in Mount Heres, in Ayalon, and in Chalbim. But when the power of the house of Joseph grew strong, they became forced labor, and the border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabim from Selah and upwards. Now we mainly want to concentrate on chapter 2 tonight, but chapter 1 gives us the introduction. It is a time of transition when Joshua dies. Whenever there's a time of transition, it'll either be an opportunity for advancement or an opportunity for regression. Every time of transition is pivotal. It can go one way or it can go the other. It can be a time for new opportunity, but it can also be a time for things to disintegrate. And that's what happens here. Now, bearing in mind that Joshua, like Moses, is a type of Christ. Once Joshua's gone, what do we do now? Once Jesus was gone, what do we do now? Notice there was no single leader after Joshua. No single leader after Joshua. It was something that went from Moses to Joshua, but there was no single leader. People sort of looked to Caleb. Interestingly, Caleb was a non-Jew. He was a non-Hebrew who converted to Judaism. He was a Kenite. And he was the only one who came out of Egypt that was left once Joshua died. So because he'd been around with Pharaoh and Moses and the Exodus, because he remembered the plagues on Egypt, because he'd been all through the 40 years in the wilderness and stayed faithful, people looked to this Gentile as a kind of patriarch or a father figure. Twice in this chapter, we see that God extends His grace to Gentiles. One is Caleb, and the other, of course, is this man at Luz, who does what Rahab did, and his family are accepted into the kingdom of Israel. It's always on the basis of faith, not on the basis of race. Even in the Old Testament, and even more so in the New Testament. A non-Jew who comes to faith in the Jewish God, or believes in the Jewish Messiah, is as much a descendant of Abraham, and as acceptable to God as any Jew is. That's the way it was even in the Old Testament. And we see foreshadows of that in Judges. But let's look what happens. Who is going to go up? Well, they say Judah will go up. When the tribes went through the wilderness on their way to the promised land from Egypt, Judah was the first tribe in the configuration of the order of tribes around the ark. Judah always went first. To understand this and to understand why, we have to turn back to the book of Genesis, chapter 49. Jacob's prophecy to his sons and the tribes. Now we have here what we call a corporate solidarity. That's the theological term some of you have heard of. A corporate solidarity is where one person represents a larger group of people. The patriarch of each tribe, the individual, becomes a metaphor for the entire tribe. So later on when it says Judah did this and Simeon did that, it doesn't mean Judah and Simeon as individuals. They were long gone. It means the tribes. And we see in the history of the Old Testament how Jacob's prophecies to his 12 sons are played out. The tribes act in the character of their patriarch throughout Old Testament history, just as Jacob prophesied. But of Judah it says this, verse 8, Judah, your brother shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who dares to rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. The rabbis even agree that the Lion of Judah is about the Messiah. And they agree that when Shiloh comes, this is a messianic prophecy. Now, unbelieving Jewish people have a big problem. The scepter departed from Judah. There's no Davidic king. Unless the Messiah has already come, God has broken His word. But since God can't break His word, the Messiah had to come already. But notice, it's Judah. Why Judah? Because of the Lion of Judah. Because of Jesus. Who shall the leader be? You always look to the Lion of Judah. All over Jerusalem, there's statues of lions now. And we know who the lions are about, the Lion of Judah, about Jesus, but of course he's not recognized in his own land by his own people. Nonetheless, he's the Lion of Judah. We always look to him. Now look what happened with these tribes. Judah says to Simeon, you help me, and Simeon says to Judah, then I'll help you. You help me, and I'll help you. They were not looking for another autocrat. They were not looking for another Joshua. They were not looking for another Moses. They were not looking for a dictator, a heavy shepherd, or a strong man. It was, you help me, I help you. Later on, the people sinned by looking for a strong man. They wanted to be like the nations when they got Saul. In order to achieve the things that God called them to achieve, all they needed was a fellowship of fellowships. You help me, I'll help you. Same was the New Testament church. All they needed was a fellowship of fellowships. You help me, I'll help you. That's what it was. The elders of each tribe would meet together like the elders of each church would meet together. You help me, I'll help you. Be very careful when you see every movement will tend to go the way that the Jews eventually did. Give us a king. They get more denominationalistic, they get more centralized, they get more hierarchical. When you see that happening, look out. When you have unity of the Spirit, you have common doctrine. And when you have common doctrine, you have unity of the Spirit. When you have real unity, you don't need a theocratic unity. You don't need a unity based on church politics or on property trusts or things like this or hierarchies. When you see the autonomy of the local congregation being eroded, it's because spiritual unity is disintegrating. When you have real unity, when you have the unity of the Spirit, when you have common beliefs, you don't need a lot of centralized organization. You just need, you help me, I'll help you. That's all you need. That's all you need is a fellowship of fellowships to get on with what God has called us to. That's in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament. You help me, I'll help you. Our tribe will work with your tribe. Your church will work with our church. That's all you need. When you have a fragmentation, when you have a doctrinal division and a spiritual fragmentation, the tendency is to try to compensate for that disunity with an artificial unity based on church politics, based on centralization and becoming more and more hierarchical. But that was never what God wanted. It wasn't what He wanted for Israel. It wasn't what He wanted for the church. Well, we have to follow somebody. Yeah, you follow the Lion of Judah. When people begin looking to a strong man, it's because they're not looking to Jesus. Now, this is not to say that God doesn't use men, but when He does, it's always in the pattern with what you see in Judges or in the book of Acts. The book of Judges prefigures Israel's history. It continues the story of the conquest with Joshua, but it prefigures Israel's history. Israel's history is what you read in Chronicles and Kings. What is Israel's history? Backsliding, revival. Backsliding, revival. Backsliding, revival. The roller coaster. That's Israel's history. What is the history of the church? Backsliding, revival. Backsliding. Why are these things written? 1 Corinthians 10 tells us why they're written. Romans 15 tells us why they're written. They're written for us so we wouldn't make the same mistakes. But we do. The roller coaster. Judges is a microcosm of Israel's future history and a foreshadowing of the church's history. How bad does it have to get and for how long? And what God would do when the people would backslide and wouldn't repent, He would allow their enemies to prevail against them in order to bring them to repentance. That's Israel's history, but also it's modern Christian history. Let's continue looking at these things. Adonai-Bezek, they cut off his toes and they cut off his thumbs, his big toes. If you sever the big toe from the metatarsal and if you sever the ulna from the metacarpal, somebody becomes effectively crippled because they can't balance and they lose dexterity. In the ancient Near East, and in fact, elements of this persist to this day, you want to kill your enemies, but you want to humiliate their leader. You understand? Humiliation is worse than death. You see this all over the East. To this day, Japanese businessmen, when a corporation goes bankrupt, you see the managing director commit harikari. They still do that. There's still instances where it happens, so they commit harikari. Arafat said about 3 months ago, he said he hopes he dies in jihad instead of being killed, instead of being captured by the Israelis. This idea of death is desirable to being humiliated or subjugated. It's the worst thing in their cultural mentality. And that's what was happening here. Remember when Zedekiah wouldn't repent and they took him to Babylon in fetters, they ripped his eyes out. They ripped his eyes out. Humiliation was worse than death. You kill the people, but you humiliate the leader. you make a display of them. And that's what they did here. And so the story continues. You help me, I'll help you. The people begin looking to Caleb because he's the last guy still around who remembers Moses. Last guy around who remembers what happened with the Exodus. He's like a patriarchal figure despite the fact that he's not an ethnic Jew. God is no respecter of persons based on race. But let's continue. Most of the tribes could not get the victory. Most of the tribes. The ones who followed Judah did. But the other tribes generally could not get the victories. Sometimes they did, usually they didn't. The book of Judges is a book of military history. It always gives the casualty statistics after every war. The worst war in Judges, however, the bloodiest war, the cruelest war, the war with the most blood on the ground and the most killed, was the last war in Judges, when the woman's body was hacked up, remember? Why was it the worst? Because all the other wars in Judges were Hebrew fighting Canaanites, or Hebrew fighting Amalekites, or Hebrew fighting Philistine. But the last war in Judges was Hebrew fighting Hebrew. The worst battles we will ever have will not be against unbelievers. It'll not be when you go against Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or the Roman Church or liberal Protestants or the Muslims or the Freemasons. Those will not be the costliest battles or the most painful battles. The most painful battles are the ones when you have no choice but to raise your sword against a fellow, supposedly, believer. That's the costliest war. And they had no choice. The woman's body was hacked up. So as we look at Judges from this chapter, it's a panorama of Israel's history, foreshadowing things for the church. Notice the strategic detail is always important. What you see here is what you see in Samuel. It's what you see in Chronicles. The only enduring victories God's people won, the only enduring victories are the victories they won in the valley. The only enduring victories were the ones they got in the valley. Now they could get victories on the mountain. When strategically you have the high ground and your opponent is in the low ground and you can see him, he can't see you. You have every strategic advantage. You can really be victorious. But in the valley, they had the iron chariots. They couldn't defeat them in the valley because in the valley, they had the iron chariots in verse 19. So what would happen is, what you would later see happen in 70 AD, what you saw happen at Masada. Oh, he had a stronghold on the mountain, but they laid siege. They would just surround the mountains and choke them off. The only enduring victories are the ones you get in a valley. We have two kinds of trials in the Bible, the valley and the wilderness. You've heard me say this before. A wilderness is a prolonged period of trial and testing, but a valley is one particular trial. David had to kill Goliath in the valley. The other army stayed on the mountain. They wouldn't go down. Only David went into the valley of Elach to kill Goliath. That's why it says in James, count as trials, my brethren. Count as blessing, my brethren, when you endure trials. Not the trials themselves, but that's where the real victory is. The only real enduring victory in a Christian life are the victories we get in a valley at a time of trial. Who wants to go into the valley? Nobody, but that's where the victory is. That's where the real victory is. Those are the only victories that mattered. The tribe of Dan kept retreating to the mountains. That's what you have today. They retreat to the mountains. When you're on the mountaintop, all you can see is other mountains. And in the distance, you can even see Mount Zion on the sides of the north. But between the mountaintop you are on and Mount Zion on the sides of the north, there's a lot of valleys. Including one last valley, the valley of death, unless Jesus comes first. Now, don't get me wrong, I love being on the mountain. But unless you've been in the valley, you won't appreciate the mountain. When you're on the mountain, you can see Mount Zion. You feel close to the Lord. You feel like you're going to heaven. You're on your way to be with Jesus. Everything's good. You feel elated emotionally because you are uplifted spiritually. Is that wrong? No. But that's not where the victory is. They kept retreating to the mountains. What do you have in the church today? Celebration praise. They just retreat to the mountains. The worship of worship, the celebration of praise-a-thons, and everything's feel good. They don't want to go into the valley. Who wants to do that? Who wants trials? So they retreat to the mountains, and meanwhile they get choked off. And they're getting choked off. Some of the provinces of Canada are on the verge of passing laws, or in effect already have laws, which say you can't deny someone the position as your pastor on the basis of his sexual orientation. That's sex discrimination. Pretty soon militant homosexuals are going to begin litigating on that basis. You have to let a homosexual or even a lesbian be your pastor. You can't discriminate on that basis. In Australia, although the Muslims give no rights to Christians in Muslim countries, they just passed a law in Australia now, and Muslims are already taking legal action against Christians for speaking against Islam. Now, you'll never find a law protecting the rights of Christians in a Muslim country. They can retreat to the mountains all they want. Your enemies will surround the mountain and siege it like they did to the tribe of Dan. They just run away. They stay on the mountains. Oh, we want to be encouraged. Oh, that's negative. I don't receive it. We want to have feel-good Christianity. We want to praise-a-thon. We want a celebration praise. But the enemies all over the valley surrounding the mountains, and they're getting choked off and choked off and choked off. The only enduring victories you will ever get in your Christian life, or I will ever get in my Christian life, the only enduring victories are the ones we get in the valley. The only enduring victory you will get in your marriage or your family, the only enduring victory you will get in your church are the victories that we get in the valley. Who wants the valley? Nobody. Is it necessary? Yes, it is a necessary evil. That's where the victory is. If you can't win the victory in the valley, you don't win the war. Now in the valley, the enemy has the iron chariots. The whole world's in the power of the wicked one. They've got the crooked politicians. They've got the media. They've got everything. They've got everything. The world's got it all. We've got nothing. Except the Lion of Judah. Who are you following? Who are you following? They retreat to the mountains. But let's look what happens. Some of these tribes eventually managed to overcome, like the sons of Joseph, etc. Some of them do. With this background in view, let's see why they couldn't get the victory in the valleys. Chapter 2. Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal. Most of you know the angel of the Lord is the Metatron in Judaism. It is a Christophany, an Old Testament manifestation of Jesus. If you have a King James Bible, the King James Bible completely mistranslates this. The King James puts an indefinite article, an angel of the Lord. That's a complete, total mistake which cannot be defended. Linguistically, the King James is absolutely wrong. It is the angel of the Lord. The text warrants a definite article. Who is the angel of the Lord? Well, most of us know, but in case you don't, for the sake of the tape, turn with me, please, to Judges chapter 13. Now, I'm not attacking the King James Bible. When it gets it right, but this is a place where it gets it dead wrong. Let's look at chapter 13. Then Manoah, in verse 11, that's the father of Samson, arose and followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to the woman?" And he said, "I am." Now, of course, most of us know in biblical Hebrew, you never say you are, I am, unless, of course, you are. In Greek, it is ego ami. When Jesus said it before Abraham was ego ami, they tried to stone him. It's a term of deity. And Manoah said, "Now, when your words come to pass, what shall be the boy's mode of life and his vocation?" So the angel of the Lord, definite article, said to Manoah, "Let the woman pay attention to all that I said. She should not eat anything that comes from the vine, or drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing, and let her observe all I command." We deal with these things on the tape, the Vow of the Nazarite. I think we've done it here once before, that teaching. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Please let us detain you that we may prepare a kid for you." And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food, but if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name, so that when your words come to pass we may honor you? But the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? That term, wonderful, in Hebrew is Pele. Pele. It is an adjective only ever used to describe God. Never anyone or anything else in Hebrew. Pele. Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, unto us a child is born, a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Pele Yoetz, Wonderful Counselor, Avi Ad, Eternal Father, El Gabor, God Almighty, and Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. His name shall be called Pele Yoetz, Wonderful Counselor. Why do you ask my name? It is Pele. It is God. This is the Christophany. The angel of the Lord is the Metatron of Judaism. It is an Old Testament enfleshment of Jesus, with whom Jacob wrestled, etc. The angel of the Lord. Not an angel, the angel. Going back to Judges 2:1 now, the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim. Bochim means the weepers, or the ones who are weeping. And he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I'd sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Now repeatedly the Torah told the Jews, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. This was not an angel, this was the angel. It was Jesus, it was God himself. It was not an angel that made the covenant, it was the angel. Okay, it's the Lord. King James, I don't know how they did it, but it's completely wrong, totally wrong. It points people away from Jesus if you take it at face value in this instance. As for you, I will never break my covenant with you. As we've noted various times, the validity of a covenant never depends on the unfaithfulness of man, but only on the faithfulness of God. If God is finished with the Jews, I don't know one reason he shouldn't be finished with the church. Fortunately for the Jews and the church, the validity of a covenant never depends on the unfaithfulness of man, but it only depends on the faithfulness of God. I will never make my covenant. Paul says, he is faithful when we are unfaithful, for he cannot deny himself. The validity of a covenant never depends on the infidelity of man, only on the faithfulness of God. But let's see what happens. As for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land, but you shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this that you've done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. And it came about when the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, that they lifted up their voices and wept. So they named that place Bochim, the place of weepers, or those who are weeping. They named it Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Then Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done. Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served Baals. And they forsook the Lord and God, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken and as the Lord had sworn to them, so that they were severely distressed. And the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. And yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the hands of their enemies all the days of the judge, for the Lord was moved to pity by their groanings because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. But it came about when the judge died that they would turn back and act more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not listened to my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. So the Lord allowed those nations to remain, not driving them out quickly. And he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter once more. The reason they couldn't drive them out is because God said directly, and in no uncertain terms, make no covenant with them. Do not become involved with them. Moses said other gods are demons, Shadim, quoted by Paul, the Manoi. Hare Krishna is not a god, he is a demon. Rama Shiva is a demon. Allah was the Arabian moon god. Demon. Make no covenant with them. And they bow down to their Baals and their Ashtaroth. Now on the golden calf tapes and other tapes we explain what Baal means. Baal being the Hebrew word for husband, master, and owner. Yahweh was to be the true Baal. Your husband is your maker. As the church is the bride of Christ, he's the husband. So Yahweh was to be the husband of Israel. But another Baal comes in the same name. That's the way seduction works. Somebody comes along saying he's Baal. Yahweh was Baal. Another Baal comes along with the same name. And of course we've explained this here many times before. The Mormons say they're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, their Jesus Christ is the half-brother of Satan. He has the same name, but it's not Jesus Christ. It's a different one. Allah is one of the two Arabic words for God. But it's not the same God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It has the same name. It's like Baal. And of course we have Ashtaroth. All you have today is the pseudo-Christianization of Ashtaroth. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, etc. It's not Mary, it's Ashtaroth. It's not Mary, it's Ashtaroth. All these things, of course, go back to ancient Babylon. Semiramis, the Minerva, the rest of it. It's not Mary, and it's not Baal. It's not God, and it's not Mary. It's not... Have the same names, same images maybe, but it's not the same person. Make no covenant with them. They always have an agenda. They always have an agenda. And you don't need a lot of brains to figure that out. In the ecumenical literature, the Roman Catholic Church openly states, they state it on television, the road to ecumenical unity is the road back to Rome. They openly say that. I watched an excerpt from the Catholic TV station the other day in Pittsburgh. They had a graduate of Moody Bible Institute who had been an evangelical missionary in Central America on this television program called The Long Journey Home, telling how born-again Christians have become Catholics. Now, there's a lot more Catholics who become born-again Christians, but you won't see that on television. TBN or CBN would never allow the testimony of a Catholic who got saved. It might offend the Catholics. But the Catholics will have the testimonies of former events. It's always a one-way street. They have rights, you don't. Islam, they have rights, you don't. Not one Islamic country will give the rights to you that they come here and demand. Not one. Not one. I was in Israel a few weeks ago. I was at a place called Ramat Rachel, opposite Bethlehem, 1 mile across from Bethlehem. On my left was an area called Har Homa. It's the Jewish area of Bethlehem they didn't give back to Arafat. And on my right was a neighborhood called Gilo, which Arafat's terrorists were shelling every day until the Israelis went in and made them stop the shelling. They invaded the Church of the Nativity. I'm looking at the Church of the Nativity. It's 1 mile from me across the valley. I can see the tanks. I can see everything. The reconnaissance balloon. I can watch the whole bit. They invade the Church of the Nativity. Now, it's not a born-again church, but it's a church. Historically, one of the most important churches in Christendom. Historically. Important architecturally and historically, that's all. They invade this place, and they're holding the monks hostage at gunpoint. They're holding the clergy hostage at gunpoint. Muslim gunmen, terrorists who were shelling a Jewish neighborhood, invade this church. They're holding the clergy hostage at gunpoint. The clergy were holding up banners to the Israeli soldiers, please get us out of here. A couple of the monks made it out and said, they're looting the church, they're pilfering the gold. Then I go in, turn on CNN, and I'm told the Israelis are conducting a siege. I'll bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee. The next day, the hugest quarterly losses of any corporation in world history. Time Warner, AOL, CNN, $53 billion in 3 months. Let them go to the wall. A siege? Get us out of here! Can you imagine what would happen if Christian gunmen entered the church and pilfered the mosque and pilfered the gold? They'd be going bananas. They always have an agenda. They have rights, you don't. We have to come to an accommodation with these people. That is the testimony of losers. That means you can't beat them in the valley. Make no accommodation with them. The Grand Mufti of Damascus, a senior Islamic clergyman, preaches in Schuler's crystal thing. Dear Lord, send an angel with a slingshot. And then his protege here in Chicago, Heibels, last month has a Muslim clergyman explaining Islam to born-again Christians. I've been from Muslim countries, from Indonesia and Malaysia. I've been to Brunei. I've been to Morocco. I've been to the Persian Gulf. I've been to Turkey. I've been to Jordan. I've been to Egypt. Find me one Muslim country that will allow a Christian preacher to explain the gospel of Jesus Christ to Muslims. They have rights. You don't. Make no covenant with them. But they do. They do. Well, we have to accommodate these people and get along. So Jerry Falwell has homosexuals in his church. He has homosexuals up on his platform. Several months ago, he called Reverend Moon an unsung hero, a man who says he's the return of Jesus Christ, and Falwell sings his praises. Then people want to know why America is becoming like Europe, post-Christian, neo-pagan. Why they can't get the victory. Why North America is going down the tubes. Why can't they win? They can do nothing about Islam. They can do nothing about homosexuality, nothing about New Age, nothing about the ecumenical movement. Right now, because of the moral scandals, they got the Roman Catholic Church right where you want them, but they won't lift a finger to take advantage of it. We have to make a covenant with them, evangelicals and Catholics together. Or Robert Schuller, Christians and Muslims together. Or Peter Kreeft's book, Ecumenical Jihad, endorsed by Chuck Colson and J.I. Packer. We have to have ecumenical unity with Islam to morally redeem society. God says, make no covenant with them. So they just retreat to the mountains to feel good Christianity. Bless me club stuff. Another praise-a-thon. In August of last year, Paul Crouch said on television, I want my Muslim brothers to help me to understand this book, and he holds up the Koran. 4 weeks later, September 11th, they did that very thing. Make no covenant with them. No covenant. Make no covenant with the Roman Church. Make no covenant with the Mormons. Make no covenant with homosexuality or Islam. You shall make no covenant with them, saith the Lord. But you've not obeyed me. What's this that you've done? Therefore I will not drive them out before you. There will be thorns in your side, and they shall be a snare to you. a snare to you. Last week, a law was proposed in the Swedish parliament that even if you were to read Old Testament prohibitions against homosexuality, you'd be arrested and sent to prison for a hate crime. You don't think they'll try to bring that here? You don't think they're going to try to crack down on homeschooling? They already tried it. This was the first place they ever tried to do that. This was the first place they tried to stop homeschooling. You don't think they'll try it? They didn't get away with it the last time. But the last time, you had enough Christians to make a difference. Now the Christians are up in the mountains. They've retreated. What's going to happen now? Make no covenant with them. Now what happened here? The people in verse 4 lifted up their voices and wept. They listened to the voice of the angel of the Lord and wept, and they named the place Bochim. Today, instead of people lifting up their voices and weeping, they go to Pensacola or Toronto and laugh. You understand? Instead of weeping, they laugh. They're encouraged to laugh by false prophets sent from hell to encourage them to do so. By backsliders like Pat Robinson. By demons like Rodney Howard Brown. Laugh! Don't weep. What hope is there? What hope? Two days after September 11th, the so-called born-again Christian president from Texas went on TV and called Islam a religion of peace and tolerance. Tell that to the Christians in Nigeria being murdered every day of the week. I was just in Kenya in March. I did a seminar for black African pastors. You know what they were saying? We don't see 1/10 of what the Muslims are doing to Christians in Africa. We don't see 1/10 of it, but nobody says a word. 55,000 people nearly killed in the South Philippines by the Muslims, Abu Sayyaf. Do you see that on the front page of the newspaper every day? 55,000. Where's that? 15,000 Christians killed in East Timor, 200,000 Christian refugees. Is that on the front page every day? 2 million black African Christians killed in Sudan in the last 12 years. 2 million! How come nobody wants a UN investigation about that? How come nobody wants boycotts about that? But if somebody stands up to them, this is an outrage. Get rid of those damn Jews. Oh, don't worry. God's going to deal with Israel for the rejection of Jesus. They're under the curse of the law. But woe to that nation who lifts a finger against them. You call for a Palestinian state after acts of terrorism? You know what that says to the Muslim mind? You see, Allah's giving us the victory in the jihad. Blow something else up. That's your president. I pray for that man every day. But I wouldn't trust him as far as I can spit. Nor the alternative. Remember, nations get the leaders they deserve. Nations get the leaders we deserve. It's only going to encourage more terrorism. That's all it will encourage is more. To the Muslim mind, God's given us the victory in the jihad. That's how they think. See, now we're going to get a Palestinian state, blow up the Statue of Liberty. Who knows what we'll get then? That's how they think. It's a religion of peace and tolerance. George Bush Jr. is either an idiot, a liar, or both. Personally, I think he's both. Now, I pray for him every day. But how could he say that? How could he say that? Tell that to the Christians I met with in Africa in March. Something's wrong. Instead of having leaders who call us to weep, we have leaders calling us to laugh. Political leaders are as bad as the leaders in government. You notice that? So somebody is determined by their political position? Moon says he's the return of Jesus Christ. He says he's the Lord of the second advent. He says he's the return of Christ. And Falwell endorses him? Calls him an unsung hero? Yeah, but his politics are right, so therefore he's a hero. Where's this coming from? That's the right. The left is the same. The left is the same. Socioeconomically, most of the gains made by American blacks since the civil rights movement of the 60s have been eroded by the crack cocaine epidemic, pandemic. 2 out of 3 black children are born out of wedlock. Now, when you go back to Booker T. Washington, way before Martin Luther King, black leadership came from the Christian community, from the church. Their whole thing was morality. Now you got their leader, Jesse Jackson, has a kid out of wedlock. That's their role model? Oh, that's all right. His politics are right. He can still be a reverend. Well, what about the president with the young girl and the cigar in the White House? Well, his politics are right. We have to think. You've got this hypocrisy on the right and on the left. The Democrats, the Republicans, they're all doing it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which party, left, right, Democrat, Republican. They're all doing it. Somebody's righteousness is defined on the basis of, do you agree with them politically or not? Forget about the fact that Ronald Reagan got a Hollywood divorce and married another woman. So what if Jesus said, if you leave your wife and marry another woman, you're an adulterer? His politics are right. He's a brother. It's all right. They go by the world's standards. They judge by their own standards of morality, not by God's. If your politics are right, you're a brother. That's what they say. They had Clinton in Hybels Church. Not one question about his twice vetoing partial birth abortion. Not one question. It's not politically correct. No, they don't go to Bochim. They're losing the valleys. They're being surrounded on the mountains. They're going to be choked off. There's going to be more September 11th. Not just in America, everywhere. Homosexuals will get more power in the schools. They're going to mandate what they've already mandated in San Francisco. You have to teach children it's an alternative lifestyle. It's as natural as heterosexuality. That's in the curriculum. And it's a public school paid for by taxpayers. So what do? Do they weep? Do they go to Bochim? No, they laugh. And if you don't laugh, you have a wrong spirit. You're the bad guy. What in Gehenna do they have to laugh about? You shall make no covenant with them, saith the Lord. But the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They served Baals. They served Ashtaroth. They're all going down the ecumenical road. They're all going down the interfaith road. Billy Graham, somebody I once respected. I respected that man so much as a young Christian. And now the Nixon tapes from Watergate were released 2 months ago. We find out that he's a two-faced and an anti-Semite. Putting converts back in unbelieving churches. Where did Jesus ever say to make converts? He said, make disciples. What are you going to do, put people back in unbelieving churches? That's what he does. Tony Campolo, all of them, one after another. God says, make no covenant with them, but that's what they're doing. Only then they heard the voice of the angel of the Lord. Then people listened to Jesus. People no longer listen to Jesus. Who is Jesus? En arche kai ho logos. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God and the Word was God. This is the Word. You don't believe this, you don't believe Him. The rest is religious idiocy. They don't listen to Jesus anymore. They don't listen to Jesus. If they did, they'd be weeping, not laughing. If they did, they wouldn't be ecumenical or interfaith. Joshua dies, and then all those who remember him died, and another generation comes along. Look what it says about the next generation. Verse 10. Another generation after them who did not know the Lord. God has no grandchildren, only children. No grandchildren. They did not know the Lord. Practically every one of these churches began right. Every one of these movements, denominations, they knew the Lord. The Methodists, Wesley's people, they knew the Lord. The Baptists, they knew the Lord. The Brethren, they knew the Lord. The Presbyterians, they knew the Lord. But a lot of these people coming out of their seminaries today are not even saved. They don't know the Lord. They don't know the Lord, and they don't want to. Making judgment inevitable. Is God going to do it? No. You want to fool around with those guys? They'll do it. And they'll do it. Who do they follow? Who do they follow? Well, I know who we should follow. We should follow the Lion of Judah. We should follow the angel of the Lord. That's what we should follow. But instead of following him, we're following men. Not the men who will tell us to go to Boheme and weep, but the men who will tell us to go to Pensacola or Toronto and laugh. There's no victory. Just retreat to the mountains. The worship of worship, another praise-a-thon, another celebration praise. We want to be on a hilltop and celebrate and feel good all the time. You can only do that for so long. And then, down in the valleys, that mountain is besieged like Masada, and they begin to choke you off like they did to the tribe of Dan. Being choked off. What happens? They're following the wrong person. They're following the wrong tribe. Who are they following? Who are we following? Do yourself a big favor. Do your family a big favor. Do your church a big favor. Don't follow Colson. Don't follow Crouch. Don't follow Robertson. And above all, don't follow Jacob Prasch. Follow the angel of the Lord, the Lion of Judah. God bless. See you tomorrow.